All right, buckle up because today's deep dive is going to be a wild ride. We're diving straight into the book of Exodus.
Exodus, yeah. That's a big one. Full of drama, intrigue, big themes.
You said it. We're talking slavery, escape, divine intervention, the works. We asked you to send in excerpts, and let me tell you, you did not disappoint.
Not at all. It's a story that just grabs you, even after all these centuries.
Absolutely. So we're starting off in ancient Egypt. The Israelites are enslaved, forced to labor under a pharaoh who, well, let's just say he wasn't exactly winning any nicest ruler awards.
Right. And into this scene walks Moses. But here's the thing. He doesn't even know he's an Israelite at first.
Talk about a complicated family history, raised in the lap of luxury by the very pharaoh who's oppressing his people. That's some serious dramatic irony right there.
No kidding. And it gets even wilder. Exodus 2.14:15, Moses kills an Egyptian and has to flee for his life, right? He finds safety by a well, and that's important.
How so?
Think about it, water. It's essential for life, but it can also be dangerous, even deadly. Throughout Exodus, water keeps popping up, almost like a symbol.
Ooh, I like that. A symbol of both danger and salvation. So before we get too far into this story, can you give us a little historical context? When exactly are we talking, and just how powerful was Egypt at this time?
It's tough to pin down the exact year, but we're probably talking about sometime in the 13th century BCE, during what's called the New Kingdom period. And trust me, this was prime time for Egypt.
Prime time how?
Think vast empires, military might, wealth beyond measure. They were top dog. And Pharaoh wasn't just a king, he was considered a god.
Okay, so imagine little Moses strolling up to this all-powerful God king and saying, yeah, about my people, you gotta let them go. Talk about a power differential.
It's no wonder things escalated quickly. And that brings us to, of course, the plagues. The Nile turning to blood, swarms of frogs, gnats everywhere, hailstorms of fire that'll get your attention.
You think? Those are some intense special effects, but were they just random acts of chaos?
Not even close. Each plague was strategically targeted, a direct challenge to a specific Egyptian deity or belief. The Nile, their lifeblood, turned to blood, a direct hit at their gods of the river. And then the sun god, Ra, completely blocked out by darkness. Talk about a power move.
So these plagues were more like targeted strikes, demonstrating God's power, but also dismantling the Egyptians' entire worldview.
Exactly. It's like God was saying, you want to talk about power? Let me show you what real power looks like.
But here's the thing. Even with all this divine smackdown, Pharaoh keeps flip-flopping. He agrees to free the Israelites, then changes his mind the second things calm down. It's almost frustrating, isn't it?
It makes you wonder about free will, right?
Yeah.
God could have just snapped his fingers and forced Pharaoh's hand, but instead, he gives him chance after chance to choose compassion, and sadly, Pharaoh chooses resistance every single time.
A potent reminder that even when faced with overwhelming power, we always have the power to choose our response. And speaking of powerful choices, we have to talk about Passover. Can you imagine the absolute terror of that night? The angel of death, the blood on the doorposts, the cries of the Egyptians, and then, amidst all that, the Israelites huddle together praying for the dawn.
Passover is more than just a history lesson. It's a visceral, emotional experience that's still celebrated to this day.
Absolutely. That image of the Israelites marking their doors with lamb's blood to protect their firstborn sons, it's haunting, powerful, and still so relevant.
Exactly. The Seder meal, the readings, the rituals, they're not just about remembering the past, they're about reliving it, making those emotions of fear, uncertainty, and ultimately liberation feel real in the present. It's a powerful reminder, that freedom is something to be fought for and cherished in every generation. Remember in Exodus 12.24:27, where it says this wasn't just a one-time deal, right? It was to be commemorated, relived, passed down through generations. Powerful stuff.
It really is. But let's be honest, when we talk about powerful events, we can't forget the grand finale of the escape, the parting of the Red Sea. I mean, come on, talk about a visual. The Israelites walking through on dry land, walls of water on either side, and then bam, those same waters crashing down on the pursuing Egyptians. It's like something out of an epic movie.
It's become the defining story of Jewish identity, the ultimate escape, the ultimate deliverance. But here's the thing, it's not just a physical escape, it's a symbolic one too, right? It represents the death of their old life, slavery in Egypt, and the birth of their new life, a life of freedom under God's protection.
And it's interesting you say a life of freedom because they didn't exactly stroll out of Egypt empty-handed. Exodus 13.18 mentions they actually went up armed.
Good catch. It makes you realize that maybe they weren't quite as helpless as we often imagine, right? Like they were ready to fight for their freedom if they had to.
Exactly, armed and ready. But here's the thing about freedom. It's not always smooth sailing, especially when you're wandering through the desert with a whole lot of people who are used to, well, being told what to do. Even after that Red Sea miracle, Exodus 14.31 tells us that, yeah, their belief in God and Moses got a major boost, but then comes the wilderness journey and things get, well,
Complicated.
to put it mildly. You'd think after seeing the Red Sea part like it was nothing, a little desert heat wouldn't be a big deal.
Right. But all those complaints about food, water, you name it, they just keep coming.
Well, put yourself in their shoes for a second. They're facing scorching sun, constant hunger and thirst, and, let's be real, a pretty uncertain future. That's true. Plus, we can't forget the trauma, generations of slavery, the terror of the plagues, that desperate escape from Egypt. It's no wonder they were a little on edge.
Exactly. It's easy to judge their whining and complaining, and believe me, there's plenty of it. But trauma does a number on your ability to trust, even when incredible things are happening.
Okay, I get that. But the golden calf incident, seriously, they've just received the 10 Commandments on those stone tablets, no other gods before me, written in stone, literally, and they're melting down their jewelry for a DIY idol. What were they thinking?
I know, right? Exodus 32, the golden calf. It's often seen as a simple case of idol worship, but I think it goes deeper than that. Well, think about it. They were afraid, desperate for something familiar, something tangible, in the middle of this vast, empty desert. And God, well, he's not exactly a visible presence, is he? It's almost like they were craving a security blanket, something to hold on to.
So they reverted to what they knew, a tangible representation of power. It makes you wonder, would we be any different in that situation? When faced with the unknown, don't we all sometimes crave something we can see and touch, something that feels real and solid?
Exactly. Food for thought, right?
Yeah.
Maybe we shouldn't be so quick to judge their need for something concrete to believe in. But anyway, after the whole golden calf debacle, they finally reach Mount Sinai, right? And that's when things get really interesting.
Because here come the 10 Commandments, right?
Oh yeah, time for some divine lawmaking. Picture this. The Israelites gathered at the foot of this massive mountain, smoke billowing from its peak, a trumpet sounding.
Okay, that's a mood. I'm going for awe, maybe a little terror mixed in. You don't stage a scene like that unless you're about to make a serious point.
Exactly. This wasn't just about setting down rules. This was about establishing a relationship, a covenant between God and his people.
And what's amazing is how many of those commandments still resonate today. I mean, honor your parents, don't kill, don't steal. Those are pretty universal, even thousands of years later.
Absolutely. Though some of them we might need to unpack a bit, like the Sabbath, for example. That was huge back then.
How so?
Think about it in a world where work was everything. The idea of setting aside an entire day for rest, for reflection, for connecting with something bigger than yourself, that was radical.
Wow, you're right. And it makes you think about our own struggles with work-life balance, doesn't it? We're still trying to figure out how to integrate that ancient wisdom into our hyper-connected world.
Exactly. But it's not just about the Sabbath. Think about thou shalt not covet.
Ooh.
That one's tough. Tell me about it. Especially in our world of social media, where we're bombarded with images of what we should have, who we should be. That commandment is more relevant than ever.
It's like a direct challenge to consumerism, isn't it? Like, be content with what you have, focus on what really matters. Easier said than done, right?
You said it. But the 10 Commandments, those are just the beginning. God also lays down a whole bunch of other laws in Exodus 21 and 22. We're talking slavery, property rights, injuries, justice, the works. And some of these laws, to be honest, they can feel a little harsh to our modern ears.
Yeah, no kidding. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. That one's a tough pill to swallow in the 21st century.
It is.
Yeah.
But we have to remember the context, right? We're talking about a very different time and place. No police forces, no prisons as we know them. Back then, the law of retaliation, lex talionis, fancy Latin term for it, it was actually a way to limit vengeance, to ensure that punishment fit the crime.
So it wasn't about condoning violence, but more about creating a system of proportionate justice within that society.
Exactly. It's all about context.
Okay, that makes more sense. So even within these laws that seem harsh to us now, there was an attempt to create a more just system. What else is in those additional laws?
Well, there's some interesting stuff about how to treat slaves, for instance.
That's a heavy one.
It is. We have to remember that, unfortunately, slavery was a fact of life back then. But even so, these laws, they actually had some surprisingly progressive elements to them.
Really? Like what?
Well, For Hebrew slaves, there were rules about mandatory release after 6 years of service, protections against abuse, even financial compensation upon release.
Wow, that's unexpected. It's like even within a system that we now recognize as inherently unjust, there were attempts to inject some measure of fairness. It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Huh?
About how ideas of justice and fairness have changed over time. But you know, what always gets me about Exodus, it's not all just laws and rules and punishments. There's also this incredible sense of awe and wonder.
Oh, absolutely.
Like when Moses comes down from Mount Sinai after receiving the Ten Commandments, and his face is literally glowing.
Talk about a divine glow up, right? It's an image that's just stuck with people for centuries, hasn't it? Moses, the lawgiver, radiating the presence of God.
It's powerful, but also kind of intimidating.
A little bit. Exodus 34:3 even says that the Israelites were scared to look at him directly. His face was so bright. It's like this reminder that encountering the divine, even for a prophet like Moses, it can be intense, even unsettling.
Totally. I mean, put yourself in their sandals. You're at the foot of Mount Sinai. Smoke's billowing. There are trumpet blasts. The earth might even be shaking. Talk about sensory overload. You'd think reality was breaking down.
It had to feel like the world was being remade right before their eyes. And, it's easy to get caught up in the stories, the drama of it all. But we have to remember, for the Israelites, this wasn't just some story. It was their reality, these profound, life-altering experiences that shaped how they saw themselves, their place in the world.
That's a good point. Exodus wasn't just about escaping slavery in Egypt. It was about embracing a whole new way of life, a life bound to God by this covenant.
Exactly.
It was a journey from physical slavery to spiritual freedom, and like any journey, I'm guessing it had its ups and downs.
Oh, yeah, definitely. There were challenges, doubts, even outright rebellion at times. But through it all, they were changing, transforming.
And that's what makes the book of Exodus so relevant, even now. It speaks to that very human desire for freedom, for meaning, for something bigger than ourselves to believe in.
It reminds us that the journey isn't always easy. In fact, it's often in those moments of struggle and uncertainty that we discover our strength, our purpose.
It's a powerful message. And a good one for us to keep in mind as we wrap up our own little deep dive here.
I agree.
The book of Exodus really gives us a lot to chew on: faith, doubt, justice, compassion, that search for meaning that connects us all.
We're still wrestling with these questions today, aren't we?
Absolutely. And maybe the most important takeaway from Exodus is this: freedom, both physical and spiritual, it's not a destination, is it? It's a journey we're all on together.
Beautifully said.
Well, on that note, I think we've reached our destination for today's deep dive.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
Bye. The pleasure was all ours. Thanks to everyone for joining us on this journey through the book of Exodus. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into another fascinating topic. So until then, keep those questions coming and keep exploring.